Hi kids! Welcome to our lesson in Science 4. So this will be our last lesson for quarter 2. So we are now at week 8 and we're going to discuss about food chains and food web. Alright, so let's get started. So we have here some learning points that you need to know. So describe what a food chain is and define the linked keywords. So draw a food chain, understanding the position of consumers and trophic levels, and explain what the food web is in relation to a food chain. So what is the difference between a food chain and a food web? All right. So what are food chains? So food chains are a representation of the flow of energy and feeding relationship from one organism to another in an ecosystem. So it's like the energy transfer. So paano ba naipapasa no at nakakakuha ng energy yung iba't ibang organism by means of the food chain. So another definition of food chain is it is a fundamental ecological concept. The food chain illustrates the flow of energy and nutrients within an ecosystem. It demonstrates how organisms are interconnected through their feeding relationships, highlighting each species' reliance on others for survival. All right. So we have here some food chain keywords. So we have consumer, a living organism present in a food chain. We also have trophic levels. This is the stages in a food chain. Predator, an animal which eats another animal. Habitat, it is where an organism lives. And prey, an animal eaten by a predator. So, yung predator natin, ito yung mga animals natin that feed on other and smaller animals. So, yung kanilang nabibiktima or yung kanilang nakakain, we call them the prey. Alright, so we have here the components of the food chain. So, we have the producers or the autotrophs. So, plants, algae, and some bacteria produce their own food using sunlight or photosynthesis or chemical energy like chemosynthesis. They form the base of the food chain. So, actually sa kanila, nagsa-start yung food chain. So, sila yung one of the sources of energy of other consumers. Okay? So, that's why we call them producers because they can produce their own food. So, producing food by themselves. So, by means of photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. Or chemos, yes. So next we have the primary consumers. So we call them the herbivores. These organisms feed on producers. So examples include rabbits, deer, and caterpillars. Next we have the secondary consumers. So which are the carnivores and the omnivores. So secondary consumers eat primary consumers. So for example, we have snakes, frogs, and small fish. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. So we also have the tertiary consumers, so which we call also as the top predators. These predators eat secondary consumers. So example, we have the hawks and sharks, okay? And we also have lions. And of course, we also have the art decomposers, so which is we have the fungi, bacteria, and earthworms. So they break down dead plants and animals, and they recycle the nutrients. So recycling nutrients. Okay, so let's have a quick and let's have a highlight for each of the components of the food chain. So we have the producer. Food chains begin with the producer. This is usually green plant or algae which carry out photosynthesis. So grass is the producer in this food chain. Okay, next we have the primary consumer. So in the second trophic level, the primary consumer eats the producer. So in this food chain, the primary consumer is the grasshopper. Alright, so the grasshopper eats the grass. So we now call the grasshopper as the primary consumer. Now, in the third trophic level, the secondary consumer feeds off the primary consumer. So, based on this food chain, the secondary consumer is the frog. So, because the frog ate the grasshopper. So, now we call the frog as the secondary consumer. Now, in the fourth trophic level, the snake is the tertiary consumer. So the snake is the predator and the frog is its prey. So we now call the snake the tertiary consumer. Alright, so now we have the quaternary consumer. So the animal at the top of the food chain is an apex predator. It is not eaten by another animal. So in this example, the hawk is also the quaternary consumer and its prey is the snake. Alright, so that's how food chain works. Alright, so to make it simpler, now how the food chain works. So again, from the producers capture solar energy and convert it into chemical energy through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis for some. And we also have the primary consumers. This energy is transferred to the herbivores when they consume the plants. We also have secondary consumers. Carnivores and omnivores gain energy by consuming herbivores or other animals. So, for some, we also have the tertiary consumer and the quaternary consumer. But, of course, the last one would be the decomposers. So, decomposers recycle the remaining energy by breaking down the organic matter. Alright, so what is the importance of the food chain? So, number one, for energy flow, the transfer of energy across ecosystem level. So, yung pagpapasa ng energy from one organism to another. Next is nutrient cycling. Recycling of essential nutrients within the ecosystem and ecosystem balance. So, each level contribute to ecosystem stability. Okay, so we have here an example. So same as our example on the first slides that you saw. So understanding the food chain help us appreciate the delicate balance of ecosystems and the importance of conserving biodiversity. So kung mapapansin natin, yung example natin dito is same as the example natin dun sa mga previous slides na ating ipinakita. So para mas madali nating ma-picture out, so what does it mean? Bakit naging food chain? Kasi ito, connected sila with each other. So from the grass being eaten by the grasshopper, grasshopper being eaten by the frog, frog being the prey by the snake, and then the snake that once a predator became a prey by naging nakain siya ng hawk, and then eventually as the apex predator, once na namatay yung ating hawk, so madidecompose siya, so by the help of the fungi. Okay, so and then start all over again yung cycle. So now let's talk about the food web. So how does it differ from the food chain? So a food web is more complex and interconnected representation of the feeding relationship within an ecosystem. So, for example, yung food chain kanina, isang ikot lang siya. But when we say food web, sanga-sanga, sala-salabat, no? So, pwede siyang kainin ng iba, and then, parang kumbaga sa roots, no? Gumagapang or marami siyang pwedeng maging branch or sumanga-sanga. Ayan. Showing how multiple food chains overlap and interlink. Unlike a food chain, which allows a single path of energy flow, a food web reflects the multiple relationships between producers, consumers, and decomposers in a community. So, yung difference niya, ang food web, so interconnectedness, so you have multiple food chains overlap and interlink. Okay, illustrating the intricate relationships within the ecosystem. Multiple paths. So food web showcase multiple feeding relationship, and then producers, consumers, and decomposers. So food webs depict the roles of producers, consumers, and decomposers in a community, showcasing their interdependence for survival. So what are the key features of a food web? So number one is complexity. A food web includes multiple organisms at each trophic level. So for example, a single plant might be consumed by various herbivores, and those herbivores may in turn be prey for multiple predators. Okay, so interconnectedness, organisms often occupy multiple levels. For instance, an omnivore like a bear can function as both a primary consumer when eating plants and secondary or tertiary consumer when eating fish or other animals. Okay, so because alam naman natin yung omnivore, so they both feed on plants and animals or meat. So now, energy flow. The energy flows from producers through various levels of consumers with some energy lost as heat at each stage. The web structure shows the dynamic flow rather than a single linear pathway. Alright, so meaning to say, so yung food web natin from plants, so pwedeng kainin yan ng rabbit, and then pwede rin siyang kainin ng, what's that? I think smaller fox or and then yung rabbit pwede rin siyang kainin din ng fox, no? So maraming pwedeng mag-intertwine in a food web. Okay, so we have some components of a food web. So same thing with our food chain. So we have also our producers, consumers, and the decomposers. All right. So what is the importance of a food web? So of course, number one, ecosystem stability. Energy flow and species interactions demonstrate resilience or vulnerability. Next, we have biodiversity support. Diverse food webs indicate healthy ecosystems with multiple survival strategies. Nutrient recycling. Decomposers recycle nutrients, supporting producers and ecosystem health. And predator and prey dynamics. Interactions regulate populations and maintain ecological balance. So we have here the energy levels in an ecosystem. So producers as the first trophic level. Okay. And producers or autotrophs such as plants, algae, and phytoplankton form the base of energy pyramid. They capture solar energy through photosynthesis and convert it into chemical energy and stored in glucose. They are the primary source of energy for all other organisms. Our second trophic level is the primary consumers, so herbivores that feed directly on producers. So example, rabbits, deer, and grasshoppers. Next, we have the secondary consumers as the third trophic level. So carnivores and omnivores that eat primary consumers. And we also have the tertiary consumers, which is the fourth trophic level, wherein predators that feed secondary consumers. And lastly, we have the decomposers, so organisms like fungi and bacteria that break down organic matter from dead plants and animals. So they recycle nutrients back into the soil, supporting producers and closing the energy cycle. Okay, so flow of energy in an ecosystem. Energy source, which is the sun. The sun is the ultimate source of energy for most ecosystems. Producers capture only about 1 to 2% of solar energy for photosynthesis. So next, we have the energy transfer. Energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next through feeding relationships. About 10% of the energy at one trophic level is passed on to the next level, and the rest is lost as heat. Now, energy loss. Energy is lost at each step, making higher trophic levels less energy efficient and supporting fewer organisms. And we also have the decomposer's role. Decomposers recycle energy trapped in organic matter by breaking it down into simpler compounds, making nutrients available for producers. So, now what is the importance of energy flow in the ecosystem? So, bakit ba mahalaga ito? So, number one, it's for the ecosystem balance. So, ensures the survival of organisms by maintaining the energy supply across the trophic levels. Next, population regulation. Limits the population size at higher trophic levels due to energy constraints. Now, nutrient cycling supports nutrient recycling through decomposers, ensuring ecosystem sustainability. And biodiversity support. A well-functioning energy flow supports diverse species and stable ecosystem. So the flow of energy in an ecosystem highlights the dependence of all living organisms on producers in the sun. The energy transfer is inefficient with significant loss at each level, making producers the most crucial component of the ecosystem. So this understanding is critical for conserving ecosystem and ensuring the sustainability of natural resources. So, gusto kong bigyan or i-point out dito is yung population regulation. So, nabanggit natin in our previous lessons, di ba? For example, yung mga pest sa tawag dito. For example, in a rice field, hindi ba? So, yung mga farmers natin, naglalagay sila ng mga pesticides to control. Kaya naman, for example, kapag masyadong maraming pest, for example, yung mga palakang bukid, so, doon natin nakikita yung kahalagahan ng mga snake kasi sila yung kumakain ng mga ganong klaseng organism sa palayan. Pero, since alam natin na very dangerous yung snake, pinapatay din natin sila. 'Di ba? So what happens kapag walang snake or for example, walang frog? Ang kinakain naman ng frog ay mga insects like grasshoppers, mosquitoes. So yun naman yung importance nila. Kapag wala namang masyadong ganoong, dadami naman yung ibang insects. So itong food web natin is very important para ma-maintain yung balance. Hindi sobrang dadami yung isang species at hindi naman mawawala o ma-extinct yung isang species. So, to maintain the balance. Hindi ba? So, kapag sobrang dami at wala tayong kung nagko-control doon, hindi natin na ma-manage ng maayos at nagkakaroon ng imbalance sa ating ecosystem. So, yun yung kahalagahan din ng ating food web and food chain. So, kapag nawala yung isa, so magkakaroon ng imbalance, mas dadami yung population ng isa kasi walang nagko-control. Hindi po ba? So that is the importance and one of yung ginagawa at kahalagahan ng energy flow at ng food web in our ecosystem. So we have here a description of food web. So a food web is made up of multiple food chains and it shows how they interact. So for example, yung grass, kinain ng rabbit or ng, yes, and then yung rabbit, kinain ng fox. And then yung grass, kinain ng grasshopper. And yung grasshopper, pwedeng kainin ng mouse. And then yung mouse, pwedeng kainin ng fox. Yung grasshopper na kumain ng grass, pwede siyang makain ng frog. And then yung frog, pwedeng kainin ng hawk. And then yung frog, pwede rin siyang kainin ng fox. And then yung mouse, pwede rin siyang kainin ng hawk. So, ganun. Nag-intertwine, nag-overlap yung feeding relationship ng ating animals sa isang food web. Alright. So, I hope you learned something from our lesson for this week. And I hope na kuha ninyo ang difference ng ating food chain from the food web. So, again, from food chain, linear lang yung pathway, isang ikot lang. But then, when we talk about food webs, nag-i-intertwine, nag-overlap yung feeding relationship between animals. So, thank you very much. This is Teacher Aiza, and I hope you learned something from our lesson for this week. So, I hope to see you again in our lessons in the third quarter. So, thank you so much. Bye!